Well, it's a time of heightened conflict, acrimony and discord around the world, so I think we all can use better diplomacy skills.
One of the most difficult aspects of diplomacy is carrying out and publicly defending a policy you disagree with.
So how can the same officer be viewed as one of the best and one of the worst at the same time? Who decides these things? What are the criteria? What are the standards? What is the baseline? There isn't one.
I'm delighted to be back at USIP and grateful to you and the Institute for hosting the launch of Diplomatic Tradecraft.
When I started my research 20 years ago, I was in an African country at the US Embassy, and the chargé d'affaires at the time introduced me to the chief of the political economic section. And he told me that she was one of the best he knew in the Foreign Service. 2 weeks later, I was in China, talking to the DCM, the Deputy Chief of Mission there, and he knew the person who was supposed to be one of the best. He said, oh, she actually is one of the worst I've ever seen, right? So how can the same officer be viewed as one of the best and one of the worst at the same time? Who decides these things? What are the criteria? What are the standards? What is the baseline? There isn't one, right? Well, how are we supposed to take diplomacy seriously as a profession then? Right? So that's why I now say that diplomacy to me is an underdeveloped profession. In fact, I think that many people don't view it as a real profession. That's why we have all these political appointees in the system, right? A third of ambassadors. How can no other country in the world has a third of its ambassadors to be political appointees? I have nothing against having political appointees in the system because, let's face it, career people are bureaucrats, right? They need infusion of new blood and new ideas from time to time. But to have a third of ambassadors, 99% of whom have no qualifications to practice diplomacy, I think is absurd. But then, if you look at our entry-level officers, they're not that much more qualified to practice diplomacy either. Until 5-6 years, perhaps, on average, into their career.
I am concerned, as I said at the beginning, about the link between the state of the world and all the conflicts going on and the effectiveness or the lack of effectiveness of diplomacy. I think there is such a direct link. Because governments around the world have underinvested in diplomacy, they don't have nearly enough career diplomats. I'll give you a couple of examples. India, with 1.5 billion people, has 850 career diplomats. Brazil has 1,500. Most people don't realize how useful diplomacy skills would be in the private sector, particularly in the kind of companies you're talking about, with offices around the world who work with governments.
If a president or a prime minister or any head of state or government, if they know how to use diplomacy effectively as a tool of foreign policy, they can benefit their own policies and the implementation of those policies, right? You can write the best policy paper, you can come up with the best policy you can think of, but unless your diplomats are there to implement it, what good does it do?